When it comes to iconically styled cars of the 1970s, it really would be hard to top the 1971 to 73 Buick Riviera Boattail. Introduced in 1971, the Boattail Riv is one of those vehicles that many still remember and certainly recognize from the era. But imagine how controversial this vehicle looked when it was launched in 1971. There was simply nothing else like it, particularly from this rear three-quarter view. The design was meant to conjure up images of true classics like the Auburn Boattail Speedster in people's minds, but the 71 to 73 Riviera is an icon all its own, in large part because it is, well, large. This vehicle was, after all, based on the full-size General Motors B-body platform and shared many components with it, including the front windshield, the A-pillars, the front door glass, as well as quite a bit of the inner sheet metal that you don't see. 71 to 3 Riviera was never meant to be that large. Designers actually wanted it to be a more svelte and tailored design off of the A-body platform, which spawned the Pontiac Grand Prix as well as the Chevrolet Monte Carlo. This would have given the car a more light look and allowed for deeper surfacing on the body size. It just wasn't allowed based on the B-body's width. Now, for whatever reason, General Motors styling vice president Bill Mitchell was particularly enamored with this boattail-like styling, and he had a number of studios trying to develop designs that had boattail themes to them. One of those designs was this design that you see here for the 1965 Grand Prix. This obviously wasn't the design that made it through to production, but I think it's a pretty attractive study that was done on that particular vehicle. And while it didn't make it through to production, it at least shows you what some of the thoughts were going on in the building at the time. But one of the things that many people don't know is that the Boattail Riviera might not have been a 1971 to 73 Riviera after all. And in fact, there actually was a chance that the 1966 generation Riviera, the second generation Riviera that was introduced after the 1963 to 65 original version, that was actually going to be a Boattail. Now, before I share with you the photos of what the 1966 Boattail Riviera was going to look like, let's take a look at the production version. Now, this is actually a 67 Riviera. This is my personal 67 Riviera, but the styling is pretty much identical to the 1966, aside from that beautiful script lettering there on the driver's side of the hood that says Riviera. That was block lettering back in 1966 across the hood. And the grille has a bit different treatment, but overall, this 1967 Riviera and the 66 that preceded it are just absolutely gorgeous designs. And the same can be said of the other two vehicles that were off of this E-body platform, the Tornado and the Eldorado. Of course, the Riviera was the only one of those three that was rear-wheel drive, as Buick wanted to maintain rear-wheel drive for ride and handling characteristics as well as, frankly, cost, because the front-wheel drive setup in the Eldorado and Tornado cost about an extra $500 per vehicle in 1966 dollars, which is about almost $5,000 in today's times. And here's a rear three-quarter view of this 67 Riviera. You can tell there's no boat tail. This car actually has what was called a W-shaped rear end, that kind of out, in, out type styling there if you looked at it from a bird's eye view. And again, just a simply gorgeous, timeless design. I love that feature light that comes down off of the roof and the beautiful kind of concave curve that it forms as it does so. And just a beautiful intersection of that roof with the rear quarter panel and that sculpted body form. So this is clearly not a Boattail, but very handsome indeed. And of course, the 66 and 67 Riviera were great sales successes. Well, in fact, the 1966 to 70 Riviera was. Sold about 45 to 50,000 units every year. And that was about twice the annual sales of the eventual Boattail. And here you go. Here's the full-size clay model proposal for what was going to be the 1966 Riviera. And you can see a number of similar elements in this design with the final design, but there are some dramatic differences. First of all, you can see the similarities in the fender shape, the top of the fender shape, as well as the top of the rear quarter panel. But notice there's now a secondary feature line beneath that one. In the front, it fades out kind of partway through the door, and then it's reintroduced on the rear quarter panel. That was eliminated on the production design, perhaps because it looked a bit too complicated. But look at the rear end, and particularly that rear glass back window there, and notice that it's coming to a point at the rear bumper. That rear glass kind of reminds me of the rear glass on a Plymouth Barracuda of the era, wrapping around the feature line that continues from the roof all the way down into the trunk. But that Barracuda never really terminated with a boat tail-like point. In fact, it had a pretty blunt rear end despite the somewhat boat tail-y deck lid as well as the rear glass. Here, as I mentioned, you can see that this rear is coming indeed to a point that's accentuated by the center of the bumper. And here we have one more photo. This is a dead-on side profile of the proposal for the 66 Riviera. And you can see again a number of similar themes, particularly that bumper that completes the front fender form and wraps there underneath the bottom of the front fender. That would be found in the production version. The front and rear door glass also appear similar, as do the A-pillars and the windshield glass, which makes sense because this was going to be a vehicle that shared its platform with, as I mentioned, the Tornado and Eldorado, and some elements there would be shared across those vehicles too. So the divisions had to coordinate the A-pillars, windshield, front door glass in particular amongst all three models. And so that was probably set relatively early on so that the designers could work around those constraints. You'll also notice that that bottommost feature line that starts from the rear of the front wheel and terminates just ahead of the rear wheel has a pretty pronounced diving characteristic to it. And this would become more muted in the production version. And you'll see the Riviera script emblem here appears in front of the rear wheel, kind of a curious placement, as opposed to it appearing on the front fender, where it eventually would appear on the production model, as you can see in the thumbnail image. Lastly, I'll just point out that you can see this clay model has wire wheels on it, which were a favorite of General Motors styling VP Bill Mitchell and made it onto the 63 to 65 Riviera. But when the second generation Riviera was designed for 66 through 7, many of the models did not have a wire wheel option. And there you have it. So what do you think of that design proposal for the 66 Riviera? Personally, I believe that the production version, 66 and 67 Riviera, was actually better than the clay model that you saw, as opposed to the 65 Grand Prix proposal that I think actually looked pretty unified and attractive. That model that we just saw appeared to me to be a bit cluttered and had too many different feature lines, which I guess you could say the designers also felt because a number of them were scrapped when it came to the final design. But overall, I just don't think that that boat tail theme made sense on that 66 Riviera design proposal. And like I said, I think the final production version was much better. I'm not a designer, but I will say from a cost standpoint, the production Riviera is much better. Fewer feature lines mean fewer strikes in the stamping dies. And the lack of that wraparound rear glass also meant a cheaper rear window. So not only did GM get a better design in the end, it got a cheaper one as well, and that's optimal. I do wonder if that rear window that was shown in the clay model was in part due to stylists trying to share that rear window with a proposal for the 1966 Oldsmobile Tornado, the famous red rendering that you see here, where you notice that that rear backlight has that wraparound characteristic to it. So perhaps that was just GM trying to share that rear backlight across multiple divisions, and Buick took the boat tail form for the rear, while the Tornado obviously had a very different form that ended up with a chopped off rear end. In any event, put a comment in the comment section as to which design for the 66 Riviera that you prefer, the production version or this clay model. Hope you enjoyed this discussion of the 1966 to 67 Riviera, and if you did, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and check out the video thumbnails at bottom left and right for some suggestions for you.